All right, y'all. My bad. I accidentally ended the. Oh, sorry. It says starting. All right, y'all. My bad. I apologize. I think I accidentally ended the last live before I can get into anything. But I was asking you, have you ever experienced someone saying that your daughter was standoffish or they had a bad attitude? Basically, this is an experience that I sort of had over the break, where most coaches would say that the athlete had a bad attitude. And so, like I said, I worked with one athlete previously over the summer all year, but we worked one on one. And unfortunately, now I have to work with them in a group setting. Then I had a new group that I just started working with that this is my second time working with them in this 20 days. And so first week was pretty good, but now I'm kind of challenging them and pushing them in the last week. And I had a little bit of resistance, right? And so as maybe an unseasoned coach who doesn't understand human behavior, one would say those athletes sort of had bad attitudes in those moments. And I was telling the coaches last night that oftentimes when athletes show up in their primary emotion states, which would be frustration, fear, standoffishness, maybe not focused. These are some of the primary emotions that come up for them just naturally and their human behaviors. And if you don't understand those things about these athletes, you would only imagine that they probably just, you would just sort of categorize it to they have bad attitudes. And as someone who wants to help the female athlete own their power, you as the parent ensure that your athlete doesn't get labeled as frustrated all the time or standoffish all the time or quiet. I want to provide some sort of resources for you or tips for you for today's live. So um, I want to talk about three tools to help your athlete best help themselves when it comes to working with new coaches that maybe seem frustrating to sort of work with or understand or navigate what they're trying to tell you to do. I think it's really important that we start to empower our female athletes to be able to have that conversation. So before I do that, I wanted to show this sort of concept of coach's DNA because I shared this in a parent Zoom way back, maybe 2 months ago, but I wanted to share with everybody right now. So let me see if I could figure out how I shared my screen last time. So I don't think I know how to do that again. It worked for me last time, but basically I was sharing, let's see, add a column. All right. I am not 100% sure. I did it last time, but I don't know where I got it from. Okay. All right, y'all. Excuse me for this. Here we go again, trying to figure it out. All right. It must only allow you to do it when you first log in. But all right, what I wanted to share with you was this picture of this diagram. And basically, what it was talking about was this idea of the coach's DNA. And I was saying to you as parents, in a lot of cases, we give coaches a lot of credit as they are also imperfect human beings. And so basically, what I was getting at was what makes up someone who becomes a coach? What is their background? What is their history? What's their educational skills? What considers them to be someone who can actually guide you or your daughter as a coach? And what I came up with was sort of this diagram. It's a picture. It has, a coach with a whistle and a diagram of a DNA. And I want you to know this as you kind of navigate. How do we start talking to coaches about their perception of your daughters, right? And so one thing I wanted to say was most coaches have no formal training. So in general, they were once probably athletes who then became graduate assistants, who then became volunteers, who then became coaches, right? Or they were parents who also played the sport, became volunteers, became coaches, like, right? This is the cycle of most coaches in the world. So how do they create their sort of pedigree of being a coach? What happens is most times they become coaches because again they once were a part of the sport. So how they coach oftentimes is reflected by these things, by their past influences, by their past experiences, right? By other mentorship from coaches who also don't have formal training, right? They may have gotten a little bit of education over time through coaches clinics, and I went to a coaches convention at the beginning of the year, so through coaches conventions, right? So education over time. I would say also they may have become coaches or learned how to coach through other job experiences. Like maybe they were a teacher at one point, maybe they were an AD at one point, right? Maybe they even were a psychologist, whatever it is. Like their job experiences have also made them coaches, but also the job expectations. So how do they coach? Usually based off of like what is the goal of that particular level. So travel ball might be I'm trying to be one of the better teams, or I'm trying to develop players. It could also be that I'm trying to, as a college coach, keep my job, right? So we often make coaching decisions based off of that job expectation, right? I think also what comes with being a coach is also family expectations. And I think this is one of the areas where coaches fall short a lot of times, including myself. But you can imagine that also as coaches, we make decisions also based off of family expectations, right? And then the last thing I think you need to know about coaches is they are also moving based off of a little bit of ego and reputation. So a little bit about what does it mean for me to be a coach? What does it look like for me to be a good coach? Okay, usually I got to win, right? You go to some teams and some tournaments and you see their profile sheet and they're just happy to say that they have all these athletes going to these schools, right? Like that's their main mission. That's a part of their ego. And so what we're doing is recognizing that coaches make decisions and coaches are formed off of past experiences, but they're formed off of they make decisions based off of all of these things. Now, if you hear this, you have to understand that in most cases, none of them, again, have formal training as it relates to how do I actually teach the skill of the game, but more so than that, how do I teach the human in the game? And that's the part where we got to, as parents, sort of help our players and even as parents recognize when we show up to teams that there's probably already going to be a little bit of flaw. So how do I navigate this process from the instance of empowering my athlete to have the best experience with this person who has very little experience being a human coach, right? And so that's where this gets a little bit tricky. And I think this is why I spend a lot of time and want to really work with you and while I develop the 360 athlete, because I really want you to know that I recognize that athletes are humans first, students second, and then they're also competitors last. But they can't have the competitiveness or be as competitive and athletically sound if they don't have the human part, if they don't have the student part, right? So that's really the holistic picture that we really want to create. So, let's say you've experienced as a parent, my daughter has a bad attitude or is standoffish or tends to not buy in fast enough, or they're uncommitted because they're not bought in. These are all things and words that you hear coaches say to you, or you might hear in the background as a coach to parents. And so how do we navigate this conversation? And it goes back to the baseline of where I've been kind of teaching from over the last couple of weeks, and that is the human behavior side of things. So in most cases, most of your athletes are probably athletes who are either overthinkers, critical thinkers, maybe a little bit quiet and in the background, right? Or they're perfectionists. So if they operate from these four spaces, I want to give you 3 tools specifically today to help them help themselves with the coaches that they have, right? So 3 tools to help them help themselves with the coaches that they have. And so how do we navigate this process? So we learned that critical overthinking athletes are often ones who are very task driven or doer specific. They're also want to get things done really well. They're super conscientious. They believe in facts more than they believe in fluff, I would say. They also believe in building relationships before truly trusting their coaches. And I think some of them come in there with trust, but it's kind of surface level. And then they realize over time, like, I don't really know if I trust this person. So if we come from this lens that we have these athletes with these particular strengths that also could be blind spots, how do we help them navigate with their coaches? So here we go. So number one, especially when it comes to bad attitudes, and I'm thinking specifically about my situation yesterday is I had an athlete who was more of a doer and more of an improver. So she wanted to get things done, but she wanted to get things done the right way. And the right way for her, she was I think a junior, so the right way from her for her over time has been a certain way. She has a hitting coach, and here I am coming in trying to change her swing, right? So imagine me trying to do that and recognizing, hey, I'm just trying to help you in this space, but you're showing me frustration, a little bit of attitude, as we might say, a little bit of standoffishness. And so for someone who doesn't have my skill like I have, I could take that and match that with the same frustration and attitude. But that's not the most healthy and effective way to be a coach, right? So if I was taking this from the player's perspective, how can I help that player help that coach? Number one would be I would ask that player to, I think, ask the coach to break it down in smaller pieces. So number one, I think where we get stuck is our athletes will keep doing, not understanding, and then they get more and more frustrated, especially our perfectionists. So the gap between doing and doing it right is frustration. And so if I don't match the steps that go in that space, then I get stuck. So number one, I have to be willing as a player to say, hey coach, like, thank you for all you're doing in this space. Can you give me a little bit more clarity on these things? So if we as our players can have the empowerment to at least speak up about, hey coach, can you give me a little more feedback on this, or give me a little more bite size to what you're asking me to do, that would be successful. So number one would be, how do I create the steps to get to this sort of place? By asking the question first. All right. The number two thing that I would need to have my players sort of step back and do is I'm also a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist, and I'm a critical thinker. And oftentimes, I'll give you an example of how our brains work. So every morning I'll get up and I'll make a list, and I'll make a list of my to-do items for the week, for the day, right? And my to-do list would probably be anywhere from 15 to 20 things on a to-do list. Now, the average human being could probably accomplish anywhere from 3 to 5 things successfully in a day. And even as a perfectionist, overthinker, hard worker, I might be able to accomplish 8 to 10 things in a day, but I won't think about the 8 to 10 things that I did right. I'll think about the 10 things I did not get done, or I didn't do well, or did wrong, right? And so what we have to do continuously with these types of athletes is kind of get them back on track of taking inventory of what they're already doing well. Right. So part two of this would be more on the self-reflective piece, but then even as a coach, from a coach's perspective, or even a parent perspective, would be, hey, Susie, remember that this is day 2 of our time together, and you've been hitting for 7+ years of your life, and already you've been able to listen to what I've said to you, try to make this adjustment. You've been very aware of kind of how you feel like there are some pieces that you're missing in this process. But if we can give them those things, right, or allow them to start to reflect on those things, that's how we get them to be more successful in that sort of environment, where it doesn't come off now that I'm frustrated or have an attitude. It comes off as like, okay, I recognize that I'm growing and I'm learning. I'm not failing. I'm growing and I'm learning. So that's 2, right? So that would be number 2 advice for that particular athlete. And I think the last thing that we really want to be able to give them is, in general, and where I really believe that most athletes fall short, especially the perfectionist, overthinker, critical thinker, is oftentimes they only see the goal, but they don't recognize the process. And so a little bit different than 2, because as Ali Hetzel said, and I think in a video that I shared earlier this week, is that I helped her become more process driven. And she's definitely a doer, and she's 100% right that she would still call me and be stressed about not getting something done. And then I remind her to go back to, well, what did you do during the week to prepare? What did you do during the day to prepare? What did you do in the hour to prepare for this particular thing? And when I was able to kind of break that thing down for her, what it did was allow her to go back to, okay, like, I'm not trying to get to the target. I'm trying to create a blueprint to get to the target more than once, more often than not, right? Instead of just trying to get there once, I'm now creating a sort of script or a blueprint for how do I get there multiple times, right? And so for her, I asked her, do you want to get there right now, or do you want to get there continuously over time? And she said, well, I want to always be able to get there. So that advice is also something that I believe would be really helpful for when people say athletes have bad attitudes. How do I, as a player, sort of step back and kind of help navigate that space? And then as a parent, how do I help them navigate that space? So let's recap that one more time. So number one would be to have a conversation with the coach about creating smaller steps for them so that I can spend more time understanding that process. And I understand in practices it might not be as easy to do that, but if we can start to flex the muscle of communication and maybe feeling a little bit of conflict, but being able to work through the conflict with that coach, we're going to be in a much better position, right? Number two would be to remember the things that I did do in this process, right? To give myself a little grace because I do recognize that this is something new, but even in this time frame, I've been able to do this, this, and this, right? Remind them of those things. And the last thing I said was to create the process or remember what the process is. So, when it comes to having someone new come in, the process might be, well, for this case, and anytime I have a new coach, it's not necessarily to feel like I always have to dive into what they're doing at 100%, but more so what pieces can I take from this particular moment that I can use in larger, longer moments in my life, right? So I think that's really important. But I think to start is the frame of understanding that coaches and their DNA to make decisions and be coaches is very imperfect and very unreliable as far as it comes to like education. And I'm saying that and I'm a coach. So don't worry like that I'm not trying to offend coaches. I just wanted to be aware to you that even myself didn't have formal education training in coaching, but over 20 years, I found a way to get certified in certain things that I think will really help me as a coach. So I hope that that was beneficial to you guys today. And I hope that that was really helpful to this conversation that we're having. And so if there are any other questions or things you want to know or learn, let me know. But I hope you guys have a happy new year. And we'll see you in the new year on next Tuesday when we have this conversation a little bit deeper. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. All right. Peace.